Hello and welcome everyone back to the Ælfric Homily Project. I am Liam, and today we have the fourth supplementary lecture for this time for the Annunciation of Mary, um, which is, we'll get right into it. Pretty much we'll talk about the holiday first to get more to some philological stuff as we go in. So thank you everyone for joining me, though. I do really appreciate this. Sorry this one is getting out a little later than normal, but as always, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me in any way. You can leave a comment on the reading and so forth. So anyways, thanks for being patient, and hopefully you enjoy this, and hopefully we all learn something from this as well. So the Annunciation is also called Lady Day in Lent, or just Lady Day. We'll talk about that in a minute. And is also a first series homily from Ælfric of Enchem. So far, every single one of the homilies we've gone through are first series homilies. In some ways, they are easier for me to, just as far as like the text is concerned, to get and to put into a slideshow to record. But also just the way it's gone so far. I think eventually we'll get to a second series text and some Saints Live stuff, but we shall see. So anyways, let's get right into it though. So we have Annunciation, which of course is on the 25th of March. It is one of 4 Lady Days. Okay, see, I a little rushed on my presentation. There's a spelling error immediately, but it's one of 4 Lady Days actually, and is so called the Lady Day in the Lent, right? So we also have the 15th of August, which is the Feast of the Assumption of Mary, which is sometimes called the Lady Day in Harvest. We have the 8th of September, which is the Feast of the Nativity of Mary, and Lady Day in Harvest as well. It was a little confusing. And then we also have the 8th of December, which is the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. So Lady Day in December, right? So essentially at the time of her death, at the time of her birth, at the time of her conception, and then the Annunciation, of course, is when angel Gabriel comes and announces her pregnancy with the Savior Christ. So the date of the 25th is actually established in late antiquity and is really this date, March 25th, that we get the date for Christmas, right? 9 months later is December 25th, rather than replacing some pagan celebration that is sometimes believed. That some Christian holidays do this, but a lot of the big ones don't really tend to actually. Something like Sol Invictus is often cited, for example, as people saying, "Oh, well, Christmas is on the 25th because Sol Invictus is on the 25th." But actually, Sol Invictus and Christmas, with sources saying that they are both on December 25th, actually come from the same source. The very first one saying Sol Invictus is on December 25th, and the very first source saying that Christmas is on December 25th are in the same source, actually. So, in fact, it could technically, for all we know, be the other way around. Sol Invictus might be celebrated on December 25th because of Christmas. So we don't actually know, really, but we do know that Christmas, the day, is because of the Annunciation Day. This Annunciation Day is figured out very early on in the church, and that it mostly has to do with the date, the popular belief of the date of Christ's crucifixion, which we'll talk about in a second, and that being around Passover, of course, which of course would be in the springtime rather than winter. And so we also have this New Year's Day idea for Annunciation. So it is the date of Christ's crucifixion. At least it is generally believed by medieval scholars to be the day of his crucifixion, as it was fitting that his conception and his crucifixion, so his death, his beginning and his ending, in a sense, would be on the same day. That's pretty normal in medieval stuff, and is in some sense is the 8th day of creation. Going back, then the first day of creation is March 18th, right? That is, I mentioned this briefly in my last video on Lent and Septuagesima, and so medieval scholars, I think in relation to this Annunciation date being on the 25th, medieval scholars said that the first day of creation was March 18th. And so time itself, the day that we can celebrate time being created, is the 21st, because that is when the sun, moon, and stars were created, and that is what we determine time by. So, of course, time doesn't come into existence until the 21st of March. So New Year's Day, actually, in the late medieval period in England, is actually on Annunciation. So in the earlier period, in the Old English period, the Anglo-Saxon period, it is on January 1st in that Roman tradition. But later on in the medieval period, they're going to switch it to Annunciation. In fact, there is commentary by Anglo-Saxon scholars that say like a day in the spring would make a lot more sense for a New Year's celebration. And down in the Mediterranean, January is not as bleak as it is in England, but up in the north, right, it makes sense to. I think a lot of people thought it made sense to do it in spring, and hence why we have it Annunciation. This is up until 1752, when England adopted the Gregorian calendar. They went back to the January 1st New Year's Day. Personally, I would much prefer a March 25th New Year's Day. That'd be really nice. No reason that a new year should also start at the beginning of a month. That's unnecessary. It doesn't really complicate anything to have it in the middle of a month. We kind of talked about how New Year's in an earlier, even earlier Anglo-Saxon context seems to be, New Year's and Christmas seem to be celebrated at Midwinter's Day in tandem. So this is also a comment from from Eleanor Parker, who has a wonderful blog that I believe if anyone's interested in these videos here, you're probably interested in Eleanor Parker's information as well. A Clerk of Oxford is where she has her blog post. I don't actually believe it's had any new posts on it in a handful of years. She continuously reposts her stuff on social media, on Twitter in particular. I guess it's called X now, but so she says this actually. This doesn't really pertain to me as I am not English, nor do I live in England, but it says the 4 quarter days at Christmas, Lady Day, Midsummer, and Michaelmas have historically been used to set the dates when rents and payments were due, and contracts and leases would begin or end. Remnants of the system still shape the legal, educational, and parliamentary calendars in Britain. This explains, for instance, why the tax year starts in April after Old Lady Day as Old Lady Day, which is April 6th when they switched. I think it's April 7th now this year. For Julian calendar sakes, is the beginning of the tax year in England, because it was the beginning of the year in medieval England. So, yes, interesting tidbit there. So it is the most important date, then, in a sense. I was going to have a picture over here. I was having trouble with getting pictures for the Annunciation, so sadly this isn't going to have as many worship images as I would like, but hopefully you can forgive me that. But this is from Eleanor Parker's post on Twitter this year, pretty much. That previous quote is from her book Winters in the World, which I believe I've probably looked at for every one of these lectures, so again, highly recommend as a good supplementary material in a sense, if you were following along on the channel. But today, this year, I should say, rather, it's been last week, I guess now. She said, for the medieval church, March 25th was the most important date in history. Not only the day of Christ's conception, but also the historical date of the crucifixion. From the 8th day of creation to the downfall of Sauron, it all happens today. And so that actually is an important thing. If you're a big fan of, well, even if you just know any important literature from the 20th century, The Lord of the Rings is a big important one, even if you're not a fan of fantasy literature. And J.R.R. Tolkien is famous as a Catholic, of course. So Sauron is defeated on March 25th, actually. The whole book has it's very Christian, and a lot of it comes off as undertones unless you really know what to look for, and then it's kind of there. He writes it in a way that these characters are before Christ, but they're almost, in a sense, intuitively Christian, kind of like the characters in Beowulf are, for example. They're not before Christ, but that story, it takes place before they would have had Christianity preached to them. So we have, again, Sauron being defeated on Mount Doom, which is the Mount of Judgment, in a sense. Doom has this very ominous native connotation in English, but it really just means judgment. It comes from Old English dom, which means judgment or sentence, really. In Amon Amarth or Amon Amarth, and in Sindarin is one of his Elvish languages. Amarth means fate or doom, right? So it is mountain of fate in a sense, right? Because fate relies upon this mountain in a sense for the peoples of Middle Earth. And Sauron, of course, is pretty much like an enemy, a servant of Satan, essentially, right? He's like pretty much just a devil. And here are some quotes actually from The Lord of the Rings. But I was thinking about just opening up and reading this last section anyways. I find it very moving. This is, of course, in the chapter Mount Doom. in The Return of the King. In my I have several volumes in several single volume editions of The Lord of the Rings, but here this is on 925, page 925. It says, Sam got up. He was dazed, and blood streaming from his head dripped in his eyes. He groped forward, and then he saw a strange and terrible thing. Gollum, on the edge of the abyss, was fighting like a mad thing with an unseen foe. To and fro he swayed, now so near the brink that almost he tumbled in, now dragging back, falling to the ground, rising and falling again. And all the while he hissed, but spoke no words. The fires below awoke in anger, the red light blazed, and all the cavern was filled with a great glare and heat. Suddenly Sam saw Gollum's long hands draw upwards to his mouth. His white fangs gleamed and then snapped as they bit. Frodo gave a cry, and there he was, fallen upon his knees at the chasm's edge. But Gollum, dancing like a mad thing, held aloft the ring, a finger still thrust within its circle. It shone now as if verily it was wrought of living fire. Precious, 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 Gollum cried. My precious, oh my precious. And with that, even as his eyes were lifted up to gloat on his prize, he stepped too far, toppled, wavered for a moment on the brink, and then with a shriek he fell. Out of the depths came his last wail, precious, and he was gone. There was a roar and a great confusion of noise. Fires leaped up and licked the roof. The throbbing grew to a great tumult, and the mountain shook. Sam ran to Frodo and picked him up and carried him out to the door. And there upon the dark threshold, the Summoth Mower, high above the plains of Mordor, such wonder and terror came on him, that he stood still, forgetting all else, and gazed as one turned to stone. A brief vision he had of swirling cloud, and in the midst of it towers and battlements, tall as hills, founded upon a mighty mountain throne, above immeasurable pits, great courts and dungeons, eyeless prisons, sheer as cliffs, and gaping gates of steel and adamant. And then all passed. Towers fell and mountains slid, walls crumbled and melted, crashing down. Vast spires of smoke and spouting steams went billowing up, until they toppled like an overwhelming wave, and in its wild crest curled and came foaming down upon the land. And then, at last, over the miles between there, came a rumble, rising to a deafening crash and roar. The earth shook, the plain heaved and cracked, and ore drew and reeled. Fire belched from its riven summit. The skies burst into thunder, seared with lightning. Down like lashing whips fell a torrent of black rain, and into the heart of the storm, with a cry that pierced all other sounds, tearing the clouds asunder, the Nazgul came, shooting like flaming bolts, as caught in the fiery ruin of hill and sky, they crackled, withered, and went out. Well, this is the end, Sam Gamgee, said a voice by his side. There was Frodo, pale and worn, and yet himself again. And in his eyes there was peace now, neither strain of will, nor madness, nor any fear. His burden was taken away. There was the dear master, the sweet days in the Shire. Master, cried Sam, and fell upon his knees. In all that ruin of the world, for the moment he felt only joy, great joy. The burden was gone, his master had been saved. He was himself again, he was free. And then Sam caught sight of the maimed and bleeding hand. Your poor hand, he said, and I have nothing to bind it with, or comfort it. I would have spared him a whole hand of mine rather, but he's gone now beyond recall, gone forever. Yes, said Frodo, but do you remember Gandalf's words? Even Gollum may have something yet to do. But for him, Sam, I could not have destroyed the ring. The quest would have been in vain, even at the bitter end. So let us forgive him. For the quest is achieved, and now all is over. I am glad you are here with me at the end of all things, Sam. That's the end of that chapter. I didn't mean to really do a Tolkien reading so much, but just when I read that, it reminded me a lot, right? That there's a reason that the end of all things, in a sense, for Tolkien, is on the day that the announcement of Christ is. It is on the day that Christ is crucified, and I think it's very powerful, right? And in a sense, that you can see in the story of Frodo and Sam, right, that there is providence in a sense of something like Gollum, but also that victory goes to good, goes to God, but also that the sacrifice is something intense, right? I mean, for especially those last lines here, that Frodo and Sam don't expect to live, that it's just fire around them, even in the victory, and in a sense that also seems fitting of the crucifixion of Good Friday. So anyways, let us carry on now. This is actually, there's a book called Sauron Defeated. It is part of the Histories of Middle Earth. This is the cover for it. It's art by John Howe. Well, there's several versions of the book. This is the cover art for the most popular version of the book. Um, so, and so then I wanted to mention, because the thumbnail for this video actually has the carpet page from the Lichfield Gospels, or the St. Chad Gospels, or the St. Tielo Gospels. So carpet pages you'll find actually in a good amount of Anglo-Saxon Gospels. The Lichfield Gospels actually, potentially, there's a high chance they were actually um, written and made in Wales, but this very similar style to a lot of other things that we have as well. More popular. I kind of wanted to showcase something that was a little less popular, like the Lichfield Gospels, and in part is because how Lichfield is associated here with this thing on the left, this picture on the left, this relief sculpture of Gabriel. Seems to be from an Annunciation scene. The other half is lost, so we don't actually have the half with Mary in it. But this was only discovered in the early aughts, so it's about 20 years ago, and pretty recent, and very cool. Pretty early, interesting relief sculpture there, found in Lichfield. So, anyways, just some touches of art, I guess, for you. All right, and then another thing I wanted to mention, actually, because if you listen to the homily reading itself is actually a few minutes shorter than the Epiphany one in January and the Purification one in February. But the video itself is about the same length because there's a song at the end of it. And this is an idea I had, actually. I was at a conference in February, and I met a wonderful, well, I'd actually talked to him before, but I was able to see a wonderful compeer, and his name is Charles, and he played this song, actually, a bit of it, for something. And I was like, you know what? I was in the middle of the translation process for this homily at the time, and I was like, you know what? That would be a great addition, because I've toyed with music before, right? In the background of the preface reading, I have some Hildegard von Bingen playing in the background, and I was like, oh, that's a Lady Day. Lady Day hymn or whatever, I think it would work really well. So the song Cuncti Simus Concanentes, which I provide a translation for at the end of the at the homily reading, as Charles does his thing, which is very impressive, I might say. But it is found in a 14th century manuscript, Catalonian manuscript, actually, the well, Libre Vermel de Montserrat, which is the Red Book of Montserrat, and there are 10 songs in it that survive, and they're in Latin, Occitan, Catalan. This one is in Latin, of course. There's no composer identified in the manuscript, and the one here again, Cuncti Simus Concanentes, is in Latin. It is a violai, and it is a form fixe. The violai is a form fixe popular from the 13th to the 15th centuries. Famous composer of this type would be Guillaume de Mochaut, I guess, modern French, Mochaut. Machaut, Old French, probably something like that. Though I'm not sure, honestly, on his Old French name. This kind of looks like a modern French version of his name. And so, again, the reading it's performed by Turbazon Music, which is Charles. So, and it is wonderful. I've listened to it several times before it went up, actually, and then a lot since. So it was very nice. It is interesting to hear a medieval song brought to life, and one I was not familiar with, really. In some sense, it's not really a song you'd probably hear in church, but otherwise, the world is still, in a lot of ways, pretty religious. And so, again, though, I want to briefly mention, before we get more into the philological things, is recommending Liusa over Thorpe. Okay, so there are these exclusions have happened before, where if you're reading the text, pretty much, Liusa, or rather Thorpe, is going to say something like etc. or et reliqua or whatever, right? And then you find out that in the homilies themselves, right, are different from sermons, that it's an expounding of scripture. It's the scripture of the day, and it's expounded, right? It is based off scripture. It's a sermon based off of scripture, right? And Thorpe, I guess, doesn't think it matters that much, and so he'll say, like, the first line of the scripture often, and then he'll just cut out the rest. Liuza actually gives you the whole thing as it would be there in the manuscript. And it happens twice, actually, as we kind of go back over the scriptures. Twice, Ælfric does. And so in the slides, it's slides 14 through 19. Again, I misspelled. I forgot the one there. And then half of slide 57 and then 58 and 59 as well. Is all stuff that Thorpe skips. Also, Thorpe is just old. So Thorpe is nice because it's available for free. You can find it online. Liuza is a little less nice in some ways because you have to buy it. It's new. This is only a few months old. Remember, this only came out in October of last year. But it's honestly not that expensive. Dumbarton Oaks, while a scholarly press, really, I mean, it's from Harvard, right? It's really not that expensive compared to a lot of scholarly books. So I can recommend it. It also has some good information, right? It'll give you notes on the translation and notes on the text itself. So like scribal stuff, right? Like emendations, but also just notes on like, he'll mention all the scriptures, for example, that Ælfric is really is referencing. Though Ælfric is not going to give us the scriptural references in the homilies, you can go back to Leo's notes, right? And he says Isaiah 7:14, Ezekiel 44:2, right? Luke 1:26 through 38, right? So it's just like very handy if you want to look at the scriptures. Ælfric himself is taking it from the Vulgate to the Latin, but again, highly recommend Liuza. I'm looking forward to whenever. I'm assuming Liuza is going to do more, so looking forward to whenever those other ones come out. So again, Thorpe, very easily accessible. That's nice. Liuza, I think if you want to get more in depth with it, also just to be able to take notes as well, underline things, highlight passages or whatever, I think always having a physical copy is going to help with that. So then I want to get into the words of notes real quick before we go over some other things. So let us do that. All right, cool. Just looking at my other page for a second. So a couple of words that I don't have a lot of information for, but I think are interesting to look at or good to know. We have inoth, which means womb, and it only always means womb in this homily, but it does actually have quite a bit of meanings. It really just means inner thing, inner thing. Like that's pretty much what it means. The in is inon, right? So it is something from the inside. It has pretty much a really similar definition, or the broad definitions, to the modern English word bowels, right? So like it can be like feelings, it can literally be like your intestines type of thing, right? So inoth is just womb here, as we talk about it. So we have worthful, which is a fun one that is very easy to recognize in modern English as worthful, but you would never say that really. It means worthy or glorious even. You have overwang, which is to overwin something or conquer. So I guess you could say overwin in modern English, and I think everyone would understand you in writing, maybe not in person. Literary language is a little different than speaking language, that is for sure. Then you have dreary, which is dreary. Literally, it's dreary. Often you just translate this as sad, of course. But it can also dreary can mean bloody or gory, as dreor is not a sad thing. It literally just means blood or gore, right? So it's literally dreori is bloody or gory, but bloody and gory things are sad, I guess. And so that is just one to keep in mind. And you don't hardly ever see that in modern English. Drear, you could say drear pretty much to mean blood or gore, but I don't know if anyone ever uses that. So, anyways, then we have longsome, which has a lot of things, a lot of meanings. It can just mean long, as in time. It can be wearisome or tedious, as in actions, which I believe in the homily that's what this one is in this case. And then it could be lengthy or extended as far as space relations, like. And then it can be long-suffering patient of a person when you're using to describe a person. So, and then we also have wela, which is where we get the modern English word wheel. But wheel is like, wheel means wealth, essentially, right? And wealth is also related to it because wealth is just wheel with that suffix. So, wealth and wheel are the same thing. Though, I mean, from my reading of Old English so far, I see wheel more often than I see wealth. Though in modern English, obviously, you're not going to see wheel very often at all. And so then we're going to get more into the specifics before we get into the more supplementary stuff, right? We're going to look at we're going to look at some poems today. We're going to look at some, in fact, we actually have another excerpt from some other text right here on this page. But I'm excited to get some of the other things today as well. So we have lotrench. Lot is fraud, cunning, guile. It's pretty difficult for me to actually find out this word. I had to look in quite a number of places. I couldn't find it in Boswell Toller, even, for example. So, and then wrench is where we get the modern word wrench. Lot might be related to something like a lout, but I'm not sure. There is a verb, lotan, or lutan, and I'm not sure how it's related. But wrench itself is a wile, stratagem, trick, or deceit. You kind of get the idea here when they're compounded: fraud, trick, wile, guile, cunning. Right? It's almost just an emphatic compound. And then wrench, though itself, interestingly, can actually just mean a melody, a song, or a modulation. Which is interesting. So, in fact, it means this here. I want to show you in this. Ich dur muth sprecka, mon hum reorum, orinchum singa, rixla yenache, heovold wotha. So I pulled this text from one that you often will see this. You don't see this in Lusa, and so you don't see it in Thorpe either. So you don't see it in my slides. But often, especially scholarly texts, will assist you on the pronunciation things, actually. So you have a dot over the C, so you know it's a ch as opposed to a k, right? And like right here in wrench as well, wrenchum. And then a dot over the G tells you it's palatalized, so yeah, as opposed to g. All right, so, and then this is from Riddle 8, actually, from the Exeter book, which is the answer to this riddle is likely barnacle goose. This is the very beginning of the riddle, though. I don't have the space to really, or the time to focus on riddles to give you the whole riddle. But there are many, many riddles in the Exeter book, and well, they're riddles. So some of the answers seem pretty obvious to us these days. Some of them there's some good amount of guesses on. So, but it says, I through the mouth speaking many voices, sing modulations or sing songs or melodies, often changing the main song. So I guess you could say melodies here. I think saying songs and then singing songs and often changing the main song, it's lots of song there. So, but yeah, so Helvold Wultha is just like head song pretty much. So anyways, we have Lutridge. We also have Smad or Smachan. So this Smad or Smachan, really, Smad is what we have in the homily itself. I believe actually it might have a couple conjugations in there. I think it shows up a couple times at the beginning of the homily. So it means to think about or to consider, meditate, question, examine, so on and so forth. But it is related actually to another verb in Old English, smuchan, which means to creep, crawl, or move gradually. You can actually see where they are related more so in Proto-Germanic. Smachan, it comes from Proto-Germanic smauchiana, and while smuchan comes from Proto-Germanic smelchana. So you have this yana ending for smachan and not in smuchan. So, but they have the same root, essentially, not the same root in, say, like Proto-Germanic, but the same root in Proto-European, but same root in Proto-Germanic. And so we have other things then, because of this, that are related to this. And you can think about it in a sense, to consider, meditate, right? You're moving gradually, in a sense. You're creeping upon this thing, but with your mind in this case, right? So you also have smach, which means creeping in or penetrating or subtle. It can be crafty, slippery. Slippery more so in a Proto-Germanic sense. And then smiel, which is a burrow, just means burrow. This is actually where Tolkien gets his word smiel, which is his guess on what a modern English word would be if smiel actually survived in the modern English, because it doesn't. Smaug as well, which is primitive Germanic, or kind of looks like Gothic in dialect as well, and is the same word actually too. So, so Tolkien is just playing with pretty much the same word 3 times, and I thought it was interesting because, again, it comes up here, and it's interesting that it has this different related verb, smuchan and smachan, which do not quite mean the same thing. It's interesting how those words change in different languages, but also in the same languages you get two. So a smaug in the middle here, of course. And then we also have another thing that pops up. You see this in poetry, I'd say a little bit more often maybe. And it's sauro kraftum here. Saru is really the normalized version. And it is cunning power here, cunning craft. First part, again, same as saruman, which just means cunning person. Saru really just, it means a lot as well. It can mean machine, device, deceit, stratagem, armor, war gear. You do have cognates, I believe, in Old High German, I think Gothic, Old Norse. But again, some of these things we're more familiar with, at least in a popular sense, because Tolkien used them, which I've done my fair share of Tolkien. I don't think he pops back up for the rest of this lecture. So anyone who doesn't care about Tolkien, then I guess that's good to hear. And so another one that is interesting, I believe, a very interesting word. It gives us context into something that is often portrayed very straightforwardly in English, and as full fremmed, right? You see this pretty easily in Matthew 5:44, be therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. And here, in modern English, you could use actually this word, full frame. You could say full frame, right? No one would get it. Again, put it in writing, maybe someone will figure it out. So it really just means fully accomplished. It is completed. It is perfect. In Latin, right? So for Latin, this is normally what this is translating as the Latin word where we get the word perfect, perfectus. And it makes sense, right? It just means completed, right? It doesn't have this like sense that we often put it in English where it's like it is perfect, right? It's without spot or whatever, right? No, it really just means completed. It just means finished, okay, accomplished, right? And so you can see this in the grammatical sense of the perfect tense. When you're looking at language, it indicates a completed action, as opposed to, some other things. So again, that's because it comes from Latin, perfect, right, which just means completed. So, and then also just another thing here to mention, and that is the Gothic "sieth nu jus fulatoye, swa swe ata iswar san himanam fulatoyus ist," which is that same verse actually, Matthew 5:48 in the Gothic, and it has a very similar creation here. It's not full fremmed, it is fulatoye. And this is from a verb. It has the same prefix actually, but it means fully done here, fully accomplished. And this last part, toye, is related to Old English tawian, and which means to prepare or make ready. So you can kind of see a relation there. Something that has been done or doing, right, is not quite the same, but very similar. And it's actually where the modern English word "ta" comes from, which, again, another thing I've never, ever seen anyone say, or I've never even really read it. Just know that. So anyways, again, a very interesting idea. I think this helps. I think the modern English idea of what the word perfect means is confusing, personally, when you read something like that scripture. It doesn't really lessen the scripture in any sense, though it does give you a sense of time, I think. Right? Be completed. Eventually, maybe, right? Like your Father in heaven is completed. You do see though here in Himanam, right? That is a word for heavens that we do not have in English, like Himmel in Saxon or High German. Now we have another word here, lan. That's one thing that I'm trying to get along with the flow of like where you put the stress in Old English. That one thing I mentioned here again, that in a lot of ways this is practice for me. That the EAs in Old English are not leon. It's not a. It's actually a. But it's just the a. It's just a drop into an a. So lan. So that seems most likely that's what that EA makes in Old English, which is a little difficult to say. And then it just means reward pretty much. And if I remember correctly, again, it actually seems a little emphatic when it's used in the text. But it's actually related to the modern English word guerdon. Actually, I don't know. I've never heard anyone say this word out loud. So Hopefully I'm saying that right. But in a very roundabout manner. It's related, kind of like the word ring and harangue are related technically, but and ring is direct. Harangue has gone through a lot of places to get to English. So it's more directly, Gurdon is more directly to the word Old English word witherland, which is recompense, compensation, requital, retribution, whatever, right? So wither being an anti or against or opposed. It can stand on its own, actually, but in this case, a prefix. So we have, in West Germanic, we have witherlaun, and then goes into medieval Latin as a widerlonum, and then becomes widerdonum. This would be an assimilation of that L with the D. Pretty normal sound change there. And then the Old French as guiridon, something. There's lots of varieties you probably actually have in Old French, but here's just one of them. And then from English into there. And so it is related. It wouldn't be coming from English, but it'd be coming from another Germanic language. And then we have another interesting one that if you watched the if you listened to and read the translation with it, that another interesting one for modern English, brid guma is the word for bridegroom in Old English, but if you recognize it, it doesn't have an R there, and that's because it's a completely different word. It means bride man. Guma is modern English gome, G-O-M-E. It's actually cognate with the Latin word homo, which means man, of course. And it is a common word for man, decently common word for man, though it does not become a common word for man in the Middle English period. It is not, right? Where is much more common, and then man becomes related to male rather than just male persons, rather than just any person, be it male or female. And so this has some influence of folk etymology, actually, because guma became obsolete, and so no one would say a bride guma or bride gome, I guess, in modern English. And though we connected to bride, it might not have stayed with a gome sound, or might not have became sounding like gome. It's actually conflated with Middle English groma, which seems to be where this idea of groom comes from, which can mean a few things like a male child, a servant or assistant, a male, especially a commoner, right? And when I say male child, I mean anyone like from any time from birth to when they're officially recognized as an adult. And so while and this word itself is heavily debated on its origin, could come from an Old English asterisk word groma, so unattested, maybe from Old French grommet. Really not sure. Depends on where you look, what they're gonna go with. But definitely we know that bridegroom was not originally a bridegroom; it was actually a bride gome or bridguma. So the bride man. So an interesting compound for sure. So next, I believe this may be the last one before we get into more in-depth stuff. We have bichapath, which is where we actually get the modern word cheap. Well, not so much this is a verb, but it is related to the modern word cheap. So chop, which is where we get the modern word cheap, can mean cattle, as often that's what you'd be trading in the sense that is your money, but also can mean purchase, sale, property, and lots of other things. So we have chapion, which means to bargain or buy or trade. We also have chipion, which means to sell. They're all related. They all come from the same source. Some interesting sound vowel differences there. The reason I mentioned this one because, well, when we think of cheap today, we normally don't think of buying anything. Well, maybe like some cheap things, but we normally don't think of all this, right? That it could mean in Old English. It made me think of this. I don't know if you've ever seen this. Pretty famous clip in Anglo-Saxon Old English studies or whatever, and it is a Mongrel Nation. I believe this guy with Mongrel Nation is called Eddie. I really don't know, but I know the clip, and that's pretty much it. And he goes up and he's like, I hear that Old English is really similar to Old Frisian, and so I'm going to try. And Old Frisian is a lot more conservative in a lot of ways, so I'm going to try to, or Frisian in general. So I'm going to speak Old English and go talk to this Frisian farmer and try to buy a brown cow. Right. And if I'm remembering correctly from this clip, one of the confusing things is that the Mongol Nation guy, Eddie, uses the word bijan, that he conjugates bijan, which means to buy, which is where our modern word buy comes from. And I'm remembering correctly, the Frisian man, the Fries, he doesn't understand it. If I remember correctly, he's getting held up on the word bija or whatever. and I think he's like conflated with like a shed or something. And I don't believe the word bijan, where we get by. I don't believe that word exists in Old Frisian. At least I'm not sure it's attested anywhere. But I know Chapion is. So Chapion has a modern Frisian cognate, even. It's not just an Old Frisian, it has a modern Frisian cognate. So I think if Eddie had gone up there and used some form of Chapion, that he might have had more success. I do actually believe it's not palatalized in Frisian, though. I think it's Capion or something like that. But I think it might have helped him more. That's just an aside. No one's going to watch this and go talk to a Frisian farmer, probably. But, I could dream. Oh, yeah. So I forgot then. We have this. And then another emphatic thing, or at least it felt emphatic to me, is this is what it says actually in the homily. If this for jimel lasaf, and beset his hicht on thom erflichem, welan thona for lat god hina idana, and amtina, from tham echem godnism. So if he neglects this and sets his hope in earthly wealth, then God will send him away bereft and empty from everlasting goodness. So the thing is that if you paid attention to the homily so far, is that idel is actually normally translated as empty. That's a very normal translation for it. You can translate it in several ways, and all related to this idea of like empty, right? And but it's actually here with where we get the modern word empty. Empty now. And so that made it difficult. I in fact I was going through the translations like, oh, idyllic, and I was like, okay, empty and oh wait, empty and empty, that would sound really bad, and so I'm not going to do that. And so we just went with bereft and empty. I can't remember what that might be what Leoza actually went with as well, but I don't have that sentence marked. But it is very interesting. I believe it's when you have this emphatic idea that this person is bereft and empty, right? That is what we get when we don't follow God. And it's not so much, in a sense, God punishing us. I mean, it is in a sense, right? But at the same time, it's really just those things don't satisfy, right? If your hope is in earthly wealth, that's just not how this works. Okay, you're going to be left bereft and empty, right? And I find that poetic in a sense. I think this emphatic way is also, it kind of reminds me of some Hebrewisms that you find in the Bible pretty often, right? This way of saying things that seems redundant in a way, but actually just kind of helps get the point across. And it reminded me of this, actually, the earthly paradise. I believe this is actually the opening apology, if I remember correctly, from William Morris. And this is, I believe, the longest narrative poem in English, I believe. William Morris is a favorite poet of mine. He's actually, I said no more Tolkien, but he is a big influence on J.R. Tolkien. And so it says, of heaven or hell I have no power to sing. I cannot ease the burden of your fears, or make quick coming death a little thing, or bring again the pleasure of past years. Nor for my words shall ye forget your tears, or hope again for aught that I can say, the idle singer of an empty day. And so again, that was, I was reminded of this because of that last line, the idle singer of an empty day. All right, and no, I'm not entirely sure. I think Morris is probably getting more into being remembered, that being remembered in the way these stories are remembered, being remembered as this poetry, this great poetry is remembered. But in a sense, also that the secular stuff, the secular poems, these random poems, this random guy is not going to, he's not going to ease the burden of your fears, right? He's not going to make quick or of coming death a little thing, right? Or bring the pleasure of past years. That's not possible for this person. And so I think it is a beautiful look at art in general, but also gives you a appreciation, or at least me, appreciation for God, right? Because maybe I can't get some hope from these poetic words, but I can get hope in God in a sense. And I'm a big fan of art and poetry. That's not obvious. That's what I study. So that's one thing I really like about philology, actually, is that it's not just studying of language really disconnected from everything, and it's not just studying of dead languages. It's studying dead languages in text, to read texts, right? And here I am reading Ælfric because Ælfric is seemingly neglected by church historians, and church thinkers, but also Old English scholars. He doesn't seem to get a lot of attention. So another one that actually gets us into a few of the other supplements. We're actually going to look at a couple of things here. And one of them is here at the bottom of the page. And that is the word nadran. It literally means adder, okay? So it's used in this homily. It can mean serpent, right, or snake, but it literally means adder. Like quite literally, it is where we get the word adder, actually. It is a re-bracketing. I believe this re-bracketing is also called meta-analysis. But of nadra, which is Middle English nadra, by the way, a little different than nadran in Old English, but nadra so a nadra to an adra, which happens actually like in orange, like orange in orange. It was a orange, right? Naranja, I believe, is what it is in Spanish. So Spanish hasn't had that rebracketing, for example. Newt, I believe, again, same thing. I believe newt used to be oot, right? And this actually happens decently often with these in things in English. You actually get it in pet names as well. Like the reason the pet name for Edward or Edwin or whatever, any Ed name really, is Ned. It's like, where's that in come from? That's interesting. Like Nancy is the one for Anna. Is because you'd have, well, you don't really say this anymore. We say my, right? But you used to say mine. You do say mine for some things in English, but not as much as we used to. And it was very common to, in a very like familiar sense, diminutive sense, you'd say, like min leof, right? It's very common in Old English, right? My love, right? Or something like you could say leof man, which is lemon, right? Love person, beloved, pretty much, right? And so you'd say min ed, right? Well, my Ned, in a sense, right? So you can kind of see how that rebracketing happens. But this adder thing is interesting because it is actually commonly used as the point to Satan in the garden. What's interesting, though, in this homily, I don't know if you caught it, actually. He doesn't put a bunch of emphasis on it, but it's definitely pretty clear. And Liu's notes on it, and this is actually his note, note number 5 for the Annunciation homily. It says, the idea that the serpent in the Garden of Eden was not Satan, but some subordinate demon is not in Ælfric's sources, but is found in the Old English poem Genesis B. Elsewhere in his writings, Ælfric does not appear to insist on this point. He may be presenting it here to highlight the contrast between God sending an angel and Satan sending a subordinate devil. And we'll actually look at that more on the next page. I forgot the L in that quote. Oops. And then, so we actually, first I want to show you another example of adder here. And that is from this account, actually from Ælfric's version of this account, Genesis 3:1 and his Hexateuch. Remember, he did the first 6 books of the Old Testament. And it says, Ax vercha seonadra was iaprathona ala the odra niotenu the godi ruhta over earthan. So also the serpent, so this adder, this nadra here, was more cunning than all other beasts which God wrought across earth. All right, and that is a very opening part of that chapter. And then it gets into Adam and Eve in the fall and them wearing, instead of aprons, they're wearing breeches. So anyways, so you can see that, though, that nadra is here used for what we would just translate as, or use the serpent in modern English. But apparently, again, in the homily, it is a separate. It's not Satan, actually. It's just another devil, actually. And we're going to see, actually, where that comes from. So this is Genesis B. And so it does talk about, I believe, before this, if I'm remembering correctly, this devil has put on a special helm to disguise himself. Genesis B is a very interesting Old English poem, actually, because the whole poem is just called Genesis, actually. But from line 1 to 234, it's Genesis A. And then 235 to 441 is Genesis B. And then after 441 to the end is also Genesis A. Well, now why would you have Genesis A, Genesis B, Genesis A again? Well, it's because Genesis B, pretty much this Old English scribe was like, I'm going to poetically tell the story of Genesis. La 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 la. Oh, I'm to the fall. You know what? I have this book over here that already tells the fall, but it tells it in Old Saxon. But Old Saxon is really similar to Old English. We're actually going to look at some Old Saxon here at the end of this lecture. And you can see how similar it is to Old English. And so he takes the Old Saxon Genesis, he works it in, he translates it into Old English, and that is Genesis B. It's that chunk, and then he goes back to his narrative. So the original Old English narrative. And actually, I believe was it Sievers? It was some old philologist, old dead philologist, who actually, when reading Genesis, recognized that this chunk in Genesis B, was not the original Old English. You could tell their differences enough that it was translated from an Old Saxon text. There was no evidence of this Old Saxon text, by the way, at the time. It was found later. I believe in the Vatican there were some fragments of the Genesis B, this text, found in the Vatican. So shows you the power of these people who know what they're talking about in the philology. But here is an example of that, this devil. And actually, you'll notice, I believe, that the word Nadra is not used here, actually, but is that vista se lada yern. Dirna devlos boda, te with drichten wan. Warp hinotha on wirmis lik, and wan him tha imbutan. Dona dathis bam, sur devlis kraft. This poem is a poem. We read it a little differently than the homily, but it says the loathsome one. So you can see lada is loath. It is really the loath. It's just the loath, but loathsome, I guess, in modern English. One knows this keenly. The hidden messenger. The messenger would be Boda here, and then Dirna is again, remember, related to Dachor. So devil who contends against the Lord. Drichten is Lord again. Then he casts himself. So casts himself, warps himself into the likeness, lik, which can also mean like body, but this form here into the form of a serpent, which is worm here. Worm is a pretty popular word for, it's modern English word worm, but it's also pretty popular for dragon and serpent. And Old Norse would be ormur. And then wand himself around the tree, bam. I believe this is really, the normal German word for tree is related. This is beam in modern English, but in Old English, you poetically would have a lot of words for tree through the devil's craft or power. So that is Genesis B. And we can again see some of this interesting idea, this interesting theological point that in a lot of ways isn't that important whether or not the devil in the garden is Satan or not, but almost everything is going to say it's Satan, but it's not completely out of left field where Ælfric says it's a devil sent by the capital D devil in the homily. And so we have some other notes from Liuza before we get into some we're going to look at briefly at the codicology. I want to do a little codicology section again, as I feel like it's important. It's a fun supplement for philological purposes. But we have Ælfric gets his etymologies ultimately from Jerome's Liber Interpretationes Hebraecorum Nominum, where Jacobus is interpreted supplanter, vel supplantons, so supplanter or supplanting. The Old English word forschrensched, translated supplanter here, occurs only in Ælfric and only as a gloss on the name Jacob. If you remember from the homily, it is presumably derived from the verb forstrenchen, to overthrow or undermine. This is a rather simplified meaning of the name Jacob. Hebrew names are a little difficult because they're kind of ambiguous because they can mean this or they can mean that in a sense. And so this is accurate, actually. Jacob can just mean supplanter. It can mean other things, but you have to go with something, right? So it's fine. And also we have that she was overshadowed, that she was cleansed and shielded against all sins. This is a very interesting, I feel like, theological point, actually, that Ælfric is making. Ælfric, is what Liuza says, like Bede asserts that Mary became sinless at the Annunciation. The view that Mary was sinless from birth, or the Immaculate Conception, later prevailed to become Catholic Christian doctrine. So it was not actually set in stone at the time, which is pretty interesting. Like we saw, actually, earlier, one of the Lady Days is Lady Day in December, and that is about the Immaculate Conception. So, but for Ælfric, I guess he probably would not have celebrated that. So, very interesting, I think. And then we also have the Magnificat. So if you're paying attention, I had Cuncti Simus Concanentes sung by my buddy Charles, remember, at the end. But Ælfric does actually make reference to him, and it is the Magnificat. So, and which is taken from Luke 1:46-55. And Leoza says this canticle called the Magnificat was, as Ælfric points out, sung every evening at Vespers in the Divine Office. I'm not going to share this with you, but if you, in fact, Charles shared this with me. So if you want a good rendition of it, you can, I can't pretend to say his name, but Arvo Pärt or something like that. Keep that off. So now I want us to look at our codicology moment. And we are going to share our screen again. Though I believe I have to stop sharing the screen. Let's see. Yeah, let's stop sharing the screen. You can see my face for a second. My apologies. And then, but you can always see it. You just can't see it that well before. And we're going to look at a manuscript. All right. You should be able to see this now. Let's zoom in so you don't have to see a bunch. So if you recognize this, actually, this is the same manuscript we went over last time. So this is Bodleian Library manuscript, Bodleian 343, late 12th century. This manuscript has a bunch of homilies, a bunch of Ælfrics in particular. It has a bunch of content in it, though. It is interesting, if you remember as well from last time. It has insular script mixed with some Caroline. So like the S is like the long S of the Caroline. You also have G's. Both G's are present. Insular G is used for the spirits. Caroline is used for the stop, which is very helpful, as like Yehua, right? It would have that insular G, and then Gan would have that Caroline G. And so we'll see those probably here. But I actually want to look at two sections. So you can recognize this at the beginning of our homily here with Uru Almicha, which is interesting, shipend. So Theithe ala blah blah blah, right? Shafta. So I believe we're going to go actually 2 pages forward here. Let's see, where was I looking earlier? Oh yeah, right here. This is where we're going to be. Trying to zoom in so you can see. As I realize this is like a pretty small window, all things considered. I guess I could make it a little larger for you though. So we're going to have right here, his noma. So what we're going to have, the first thing we're going to notice is that, well, his is normal, but noma is not the same as nama. Noma seems to be a Middle English, West Midlands or Southern dialect of the word name. It's actually normally nama, not an O at all, just an A. But again, noma, so you actually have both vowels changed from Old English. It would be na, ma, but noma here. So, and then you have, let's continue. We have was. Remember, we have our win here. Our win is the normal ligature for the W sound in Old English. If you go to early Old English stuff, often you're going to see a literal double U, right? 2 U's. So you'll have like wolf, which would be U, 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 L, F, right? A little confusing. That doesn't stick around pretty long. Win is a rune. They decide to use it. We don't have a lot of P's in Germanic languages in general, because P's, if you know Grimm's Law, come from Proto-Indo-European B's. There's not a lot of B's in Proto-Indo-European, so we don't have a lot of P's in Germanic languages. So his normal was. And then this is interesting, actually, that I wanted to talk about this. We have if you've noticed in our reading, we hardly ever, actually, we've never, until this homily, had the name Jesus present on a screen. He's almost always called Hieland, healer, or savior is how most people would translate it. Often it's actually even translated as Jesus Christ, right? Again, with the way I've translated this thing, trying to help you get a sense for the language, I think translating it as healer makes a lot of sense, because that's what it is. You actually have it in this. It is Jesus, and that is very interesting. Here, you don't have that. You have Ije, and then you have this bar through the H. And that is an abbreviation for Jesus. There's lots of abbreviations for Jesus. They're pretty normal, actually. It's just interesting because it's almost like you can miss it. And then if you remember, actually, our abbreviation as well for this, it is thorn with a bar through it, and that is an abbreviation for that. So we have, his normal was Jesus, maybe. something like that in Middle English, rather than Jesus, as it is in Old English. That is right here. That is Hieland, so that is healer. So again, Ælfric with his etymology helping us that Jesus means healer, right? It means savior, it means the same thing, right? Forthanthe, sorry, I'm looking at my notes. Hechaleth all the own hina iliveth. What's interesting here, actually, right here, as he's cut, the scribe has cut out a word, and I wouldn't be surprised if that was an accident, or maybe it was on purpose, because if you have the original Old English, we have forthanthe he echalth ala, so ala is changed as well. That happened last time again. It's using a Middle English version of all. Thathe on hina ritlicha iliveth. So we have again the ye becomes an e in Middle English, but it's completely missing the richtlicha, so this rightly, believeth. So just missing a word. It's the first time we've seen that in the manuscript so far. It's a very easy to read manuscript. I really like this one. But then next we have, let's see, Thesbith. Let's go down the line. Again, I'll link this manuscript in the description. You can go look at it yourself. Mara, I'll link it at the start of the homily, though. Mara, and, again, remember this is the Tironian note for et. So it'd be and or owned more, but on probably in this dialect. And hebith iquadan. So this is another interesting one to note, actually, here from our homily. This is a completely different verb, actually. Iquadan is quad, right? He's said, right? And what we have in the actual, like in the original words from Ælfric is Yichid. Yichid, and it means a very similar thing. But Yichid actually does survive in the Middle English, so I'm not sure why. Maybe dialectically it doesn't make sense here for this scribe. And so, even though this is pretty early Middle English, and so we have a different verb entirely, but the meaning really hasn't changed. Meaning stays the same, really. They're pretty much synonymous. I don't say synonymous. They're pretty much synonyms. So, anyways, Suna, Thas. I believe Suna is spelled differently. Let me look real quick. Yeah, Sunu Thas. So it'd be Sunu Thas. And then we have Hextan as opposed to Hextan. And then there's another interesting thing here, because if you remember our yeah, our prefix yeah almost always becomes e. It doesn't here, which is interesting. I'm not sure, because this yeah is really not a conjugation. It's just it's a prefix. It's another version of livath, which livan, or like it can really mean believe, but adding the yeah into it also means to believe, and also adding the be as in the modern English believe, right, just means to believe, right? So, but in some ways it also looks like maybe the scribe is confused, because it doesn't really look all that connected to livath, right? And so while it'd be livath nu right here, in spell really similar, in fact spelled the same, besides the fact that this is an ash, and Old English would have been an a, that believe now really is what it means in Old English. But this really kind of seems like you believe now, ye believe now. This maybe is a confusion, because again, like I said, even if, since it's not just this inflection for like the past or anything like that, I don't know if this GE doesn't seem like it would stick around in Middle English for me. I feel like this is a confusion. This scribe being confused and thinking this is a ye, that this is that pronoun, which would have been the same in Old English, right? So you believe now, and it really doesn't change the meaning of it really much. So, anyways, where are we? Yeah, so nuthur thissa wordum. So again, we have the superscript over the u, which we didn't really see last time, but we didn't make note of it. That this u means there's an n or an m, and wordum makes sense here, because that is the dative plural. So we have again that. Okay, is soth god of sothum god. So we get another goda. We have another superscript for the m here. This this on nouns as dative plural is lost very early in Middle English. So we can tell, again, this is early, late 12th century, mid-late 12th century, that this is pretty early in the Middle English period that we still have it. Another Turonian et here. And Evenecha, his father of Tham he Thas, or Was, sorry, again, that is a one. Was, Evra, Kened, Bhutan, and Yina. So it's, again, an interesting one, though, because I would say in a normal sense, actually, that, at least in a late West Saxon dialect, that Anyana should be, it should be palatalized as far as I was aware, Anyana, right? And this has a Caroline G, though, which seems to tell us that this scribe would have said Angina, which I'm not sure if that is then some Norse influence, or it is interesting, though, because this scribe seems pretty particular, even though he's seen a couple interesting tidbits that you get from reading his texts, especially the ones that are not the autograph or whatever, the original by the author. And so this seems to imply that this author would be saying this is Angina, which is interesting, because, again, in the late West Saxon, it should be Anina. Still, it should be palatalized. So very interesting. I think this is fun, personally, to go through this stuff for this reason. But I think this is one thing that should help at least when you're looking at it in a philological lens, is that philology is diachronic. Okay, maybe I could explain this term later at a different time, as opposed to synchronic. Okay, so linguistics tends to be synchronic. You do have diachronic linguistics. When you do historical linguistics, it has a tendency to be diachronic. It makes sense too. But even say, like, I believe it's Rauch's most recent textbook on Gothic, for example, it is not diachronic, right? So we don't really have a lot of philologists around today. We mostly have linguists, people that would call themselves philologists. So there's a lot of interchange, especially when you're doing stuff like Old English. They're pretty much the same thing almost. Maybe the approach is a little different. But one thing I think is important to know is that language is not the same. Language does change, and it does change by dialect, same period, so even by region, and it's going to change by time as well, right? And so I think that has really been on display here so far with this, and I really like that. And again, I really like the diachronic approach. It makes it more difficult in some ways, but I think is also more fun. So I believe that's all we're going to look at for this first section. I do want to go to the next page, though, and then look at it a little bit more. I remember where I was going to look. Let's see, about middle of the page, right here. Yep. So if you get to the point where Mary says this, then Mary said this to the angel or whatever, and this is what she says. We don't have quotation marks, of course. So she says, Ich eum Gottesdienen je timie. Again, this is an interesting one because it has the ye here again. So, which I'm not, but again, it doesn't look like it's connected. So let it be done to me. Let it be done to me. But again, you let it see. Again, this one's a little confusing. So, but again, after Athena word. Micher harmonis unada. Not really any change there. Sorry. Unhira moda. Tha Cleothus Clipoda. I believe it's Cleopoda in the Old English, but that would be a dialect thing anyways in Old English. This is na. This is a very hard to read, so it might not be na, but that is what it is in Old English. So I'm just kind of assuming that is what it is in the Middle English here. Na quath hail. Sorry, nequath. It'd be an e. So nequath. It looks like an n. Yeah. Nequath hail na each So interesting here that is used as opposed to eum. So later, actually, just below here, we're gonna have eum again. So is a very normal way of spelling am in Middle English. Eum is the Old English falls out, but you still see it sometimes. So Godes modor, and then this again a Middle English version of modor. It's modor is another o here in Old English. Oder ich eum, so again, eum again as opposed to am. Quen alles midan ardis, as opposed to midan yard. Right, midan yardis, I believe is what it is. So pretty much you're only really missing that G. Really, that's it. It's like the G's just been deleted. So midan ardis. Again, which makes sense from what we've seen in this. And then say ak quath each so again, each right here again, right? So each eum, I'm not sure why. I'm gonna keep on going back and forth. But godestinen, swa, us, well, munakrath, yeah, krath, which is a little different from the Old English, which is sorry, it's minekath, and then thus, I believe yes, thus hardy. Oh, sorry, no, that. Wait, let's see. Ooh, yeah, no, this Harley, which is in the Old English. Sorry, that's why I get confused. The Old English is not this Harley. I don't believe it is that. Yeah, that. So that has been changed to this in this case, which is fine. It's pretty easy change. That Harley. Crit. I believe that it should be the same. Yeah, it is Yechrit, of course, in Old English. Thus, Quithinda. The same. Thona thumada bale ad meta. Actually, in Old English, it's not ad meta. It is ye ad med. Okay, the sirfna or an ala thingam. I'm going to read the superscript. There's an M here. Still, you would say it. And then and. Is this thu? I guess, yeah, I guess thu. Emetis instead of emetis, so it's emetist as opposed to emitst. There's no E here in Middle English and Old English. And then Eva, so again we have that insular G tells it's a Y, Eva, and Lan vid Goda, Caroline G. Right, so not a lot of changes in that second one, but again, good to go over. I'm taking longer than I thought I would, so I'm going a little quick now. So we're going to stop sharing that screen, and then we're going to go back to sharing the other screen. Thanks for your patience here. Hopefully this helps. This is all stuff that I like to go through when I am taking a class and learning it, and then putting it together for you helps me really in some sense. So then I want to look at the Heliand. Now that is the last thing I want to supplement it with. I might look at the Heliand more and other for other homily supplements. I like looking at other Middle English texts. We've looked at a couple, other Old English texts. We've looked at a couple, and we will look at more in the future. But I would also like to look at some other related texts, right? For example, if we go over something that seems to touch on the creation, whether it's a homily on the creation or not, I most certainly am going to go over the Old Frisian creation, which is kind of a poem, and it's the creation of Adam. It's not the whole creation, but I think it works really well, and it would get to show you Old Frisian and its similarities to Old English, and so the Heliand is going to do that for us because Old Saxon is very similar to Old English. So the Heliand is, or sometimes just called Heliand with a circumflex over the E, the hat accent. It is an Old Saxon gospel harmony. It is the Gospels but harmonized, right? It's all of them pretty much put together in a sense. It is from the 9th century, so it is considerably earlier than Ælfric. This would be around the same time as Alfred, though actually there's a good chance it's probably before Alfred as well, as there's a Louis mentioned in the dedication about who it was commissioned by. This we're not sure who this is. It's Louis the Pious or it's Louis the German. So Louis the German would be Louis the Pious. And this is based on the Old High Germantation, which itself is based off of a gospel harmony in Latin, I believe. So this would be from the second wave of Carolingian conversion efforts. I say conversion. Really, this is a war. All right, they're not really trying to convert them. They are more so fighting the Saxons and saying, you better convert or I'm going to baptize you with my sword, right? Type of thing. So it's not a very nice thing. It does follow this traditional Germanic alliterative style, very loose in some sense with this. It's not in the same strict form that Beowulf is, for example, but it does have some of it going on. It is about 6,000 lines. It's pretty hefty, right? It's about double the length of Beowulf. Talking about this conversion of the Saxons that in some ways would have been the same people that the Anglo-Saxons came from, right? You have the Saxons, Angles, Jutes, all living there, right? The Saxons still round about where Lower Saxony is these days, and then the Angles would have been like right in that northern part of Germany, the beginning of the Jutland Peninsula, and then the Jutes would have been at the top of the Jutland Peninsula. Those are parts of Denmark today, but they still have the Ongelm there, and the name of the peninsula still seems to be related to the Jutes. So the Danes would have been more in the islands and over in Scania, which is more their homeland. But you do have Anglo-Saxon missionaries are a lot of the people going in this Germanic-speaking peoples over on the continent and really helping in a very important fashion with the conversion of these German-speaking peoples. And so not all of these are going to the Saxons. For example, the two Ewalds are going to the Saxons. They're mentioned by Bede, if I remember. There's Ewald the Black, Ewald the White. I believe they're named after their hair color. So, but you do have like Willebrod, who's the apostle to like the Frisians. You have Boniface, whose Old English name is Winfrith. You have Walpurga, whose old English name is Waldburg. These are all Anglo-Saxons, right? And they're taking this mission that they've been converted largely from a Celtic effort. This mission, in some sense, is a continuation of the Celtic mission, though the Roman mission did help convert the Anglo-Saxons as well. In fact, Tolkien in Finn and Hengist, I said I would have mentioned him, and I mentioned him twice more, but he had said one of the chief glories of ancient England and one of our chief services to Europe ever, even regarding all of our history, is this Anglo-Saxon mission, right, to these people. And it helps because the language is similar, right? Walpurga would be in more southern Germany these days, and not the Saxon peoples, but still, and related in a sense, roundabout. And all these are in different time periods as well. And so, again, Charlemagne was forcing this conversion by the sword, though this was actually eventually relaxed, right? He eventually said, if you're a pagan, you get the death penalty. And I believe that was retracted in 797, I believe, that law. And so when they do finally convert in this more of the second wave, the later wave of conversion efforts in the Saxon Wars, these Saxon nobles are rewarded with positions in Charlemagne's empire, right? In a sense. And in fact, you have texts that are not overly condemning, right, of such pagan ancestry, but the approach is taken with more understanding, which is actually pretty important to these Germanic peoples, right, who would put a lot on their ancestors and like these heroic ancestors, right? It's not so much that they're all evil; it's more so much that they didn't know, in fact, and they kind of like sticking with that. I believe it was, oh gosh, I'm going to confuse them with East Anglian king. Radbod. Okay, I want to say Rodwald, which is East Anglian. So Radbod, I believe, is the famous Frisian king who was in the waters of baptism, and when he asked if he was going to see his ancestors in heaven, he was told they were in hell, and so he decided not to get baptized, right? So, which is the wrong answer in some sense, right? And I know Christian doctrine varies on how this idea of hell. I know it tends to be very strict on if you're not baptized, you're going to hell. Even if you didn't have a chance. And a lot of these people were not very okay with that. And understandably, I mean, that's pretty harsh, to be honest. Even for a very merciful God, especially that people are preaching mercy, right? These missionaries have a tendency, maybe not like some people like Charlemagne, but these missionaries, much more peaceful approach normally, right? So in fact, Alcuin, who isn't the guy in charge of the Carolingian Renaissance, he's the head of the Carolingian Renaissance. It's actually an Anglo-Saxon. He is from York, and his Old English name would have been Alcuin. But here's a quote, even, and kind of this is in response to Charlemagne's harshness. And he says, faith is a free act of the will, not a forced act. We must appeal to the conscience, not compel it by violence. You can force people to be baptized, but you cannot force them to believe. And so here we go. Let's get into the Heliand. Supplementary material. Mary Child section. This is section 4. Fit 4 is what we call it in English. I think it's fitten in Old Saxon, but I didn't write that down, so I'm not 100% sure. I will say, here's the text I'm using now. I'm using Cathay's version. This is still in print. It's not terribly expensive. You can go and get this. It's from West Virginia University Press. Heliand here. Maybe I'll remove that for a second. You can see it better. So Heliand text commentary. It doesn't have the whole text. It has a good chunk of it though. Okay, so it also has like a glossary. It has a section on morphology. It has a good amount of good stuff, right? So it gives you a good idea of Old Saxon. There's not a lot written in Old Saxon. There really isn't. So let's get back to it. So again, I kind of already went over the Heliand stuff, but it is interesting that you have to look at stuff with like converting these people that, well, they're not Christian and they don't have the vocabulary of Christians either, right? It says like, Cathay says, the very vocabulary with which this new religion had to be described, containing meanings at odds with the Christian message, most particularly as regards the place of the individual among the other members of society and the attitude of the individual to God. Right? The missionaries had to persuade converts that the proper attitude was one of humility before God and goodwill towards their fellow humans, but Old Saxon has no native word to render the Latin word humilitas. Right? And it talks about like the egocentric idea of achieving fame, common in some decent, maybe not a lot of Germanic societies, right? So it's just like, in talking about like bonds and reciprocity, and a different idea you have to get when you get Christianity involved. And so you're going to have stuff like this in the Heliand, where it really does not condone violence at all. In fact, it's very much against violence, but in a lot of ways, it kind of reads a little bit like, well, Anglo-Saxon poetry. Like you even see it in Ælfric. She uses words like Drichten and Weroda, right? So like troop and lord of retainers, kind of, right? So like that's like, just the vocabulary that's there, essentially. And so, yes, so it's pretty interesting. And he gives a good introduction. He gives an introduction on like the manuscripts as well, and some of these letters, and potentially on where it was originally composed and who composed it, and blah blah blah. So, but again, the not ideal alliterative verse. We're not entirely sure on when it was composed. Not entirely sure when, or rather where it was composed. But fitten is the German word. That's what it is. Okay. So they're episodes, I guess you could say, fit in English. So this is from Fit 4. Again, sorry, this is a much longer supplement than I would. I hope it's great. I hope it's great for you. I put a lot of work into this. Anyways, Thoni was long after thu ne it arse gilested wars. Se heman kunia manakra huila. God allemachtig for even habda. That he is himmelis barn herod te weroldi, is servis sunus sendian weroldi, te thu that he her alosdi, our lived stamna, werod von witia. The worth is wisbodo an Galilealan, Gabriel common, anger dis alowaldem, thar he ene idis wisa. All right. So I know that stops in the middle of a sentence, but I want to go over this real quick. So a lot of things you'll realize is that the spelling conventions are not the same. It does sound a lot like Old English, but it does not look a ton like Old English in some ways. So we have again that earlier tendency in Old English to use a double U. We literally have here in this first line, huas. And then, but it wasn't, then was not long after that, right? This is my translation, by the way. That all thus became fulfilled, right? And another thing you'll have, and I've seen this one contested a little bit online, but I'm pretty sure, pretty heavily convinced that these geese are not geese like they would be in Old English. Okay, that they have not been palatalized. It's not alo mahti like it would be in Old English. It's alo mahti. And some of them are, in a sense, they're not like that veal or g you're thinking of, but they're more like the gamma, and some of them are that, but they're not going to make that y sound so much. And so Gillested, as opposed to Gillested. And then you have Warth, and then you have also noticed too these. You have th, which is the unvoiced tho, and then you have Warth, so this voice th here. And then you do have Huila, it should be a h sound still. And then you also have, let's see, oh, this one, this crossed B. It's a little confusing. I believe this is actually either or. It could be two things. And I think it actually depends on the dialect. As far as Old Saxon, in some ways, is a progenitor to modern Low German, right? The lingua franca of the Hanseatic League, right? And it is, in modern, you actually have V's, and you would actually also have betas, is what they are called. So this B right here, celibus, is not a bis, never going to be a bis. Actually, it's not celibus. It's actually celibus, right? And it can be a V. You could say it as a V. I think you'd be perfectly fine doing that in Old Saxon. It could also be a vis, which is a bilabial fricative, a voice one in this case. So what you're going to do is, I'm going to remove this so you can look at me. So cel vis, you make the V sound with your lips. So instead of saying you say right? You actually have the sound in some languages like Spanish still, and it sticks around. It's not a normal sound to stick around that long. You had it in like some primitive dialects of Germanic, but it's not around, for example, in Old English, right? So service, something like that, right? But yeah, so what you can tell though is that it, in a lot of ways, we have a lot less vocabulary for Old Saxon, but that it is very similar in ways. It is North Sea Germanic, like Old English is. So Old English, Old Frisian, Old Saxon are North Sea Germanic, but it has some things in common with the other, what we would just call German languages these days. But it doesn't have that second consonant shift that German does, Old High German does, that Old High German gets, and that modern German sounds different because of it, right? Instead of water, you have Wässer, right? And that's not the V sound, but it's that T to the S sound. That is it, right? It's that P to becoming a PF, as an apple to apfel, right? You don't have that either. So in some sense, Old Saxon is sitting in between these, and it doesn't get either of the sound changes. It doesn't get the palatalization, and it doesn't get that second German consonant shift. And there's probably some similarities to Old Norse as well. The Saxons are very close to Denmark. They're sitting right there, right? And so you're going to get some intermixture, right? So one thing, for example, you'll see is this cognate for the word for heaven, right? This heavenly, himelisk. You don't have that. We mentioned this actually. Gothic seems to have it. Old English doesn't. There's no word for Himmel in Old English that I have ever seen. And so, but you have it here in Old Saxon, right? So then the translation here. Then it was not long after that all this became fulfilled, as he had promised mankind many times, God Almighty, that he himself would send his heavenly child hither to the world, for this purpose, that he here might redeem all people from punishment. And then his reliable messenger, so this Bodo, that's kind of what we saw earlier in Genesis B there, came into Galilee, Gabriel, angel of the all-wielder, where he knew a certain woman. And so we also have, I should note here, Idis, which is related to Disir in Old Norse. There is an Old English cognate, Idis, it means lady. It's spelled exactly like the word Ides. And it kind of just means woman here, really. Yes, well, let's get to the next one. Munilika Machath, Maria Wasilheten, was Irothiona Githechan, sorry. Sea in Thechan Havda, Josef Yemachit, Gottes Königs man, Theo Davides dochter, that was so dearlijk with Ides Antheti. Tharsia de Inger Gottes as an Nazareth burg Pinaman servo, Grote Gegenwarde, en die sia von Gode queda. Her bist du, Maria, quath he, tu bist dinem heron liof, waldanda worthig. Juan thu giwit habes. Yeah. A lot of those, that's a lot of vowels. It's kind of throwing me for a loop. lot more practice is needed here, but thank you for your patience. And so a lovely maiden, Mary was she called, was Hetan, right? Height. She was Height Mary. She was a well-grown girl. Thiorna doesn't have a direct cognate in Old English. We do have this beginning aspect is really theol, the word for servant or slave, but it really just, I mean, it doesn't mean that here, obviously. So, and then she had a certain thing, so thehan, stain, like Old English stain, called Joseph, a Machlit, a man of good kin man, the daughter of David. She was a dear woman. Wife again means woman. I have actually seen this translated as dear wife. I mean, in the sense it is talking about Joseph, so it does kind of make sense to call her a dear wife in the sense of Joseph, but wife really just means woman. So a devout woman, again, it changes to ides here, though. Idis, sorry. And then there the angel of God in Nazareth by name himself greeted her face to face and before God spoke. Be whole, Mary. I kind of had a hard time translating this. This is pretty much Westu Hal, right? Hel Westu. Right? This is hell, which is whole or hail, right? It's often translated as hail. Hail has this archaic sense to it. It literally just means healthy or like health to you, Mary, or be whole, right? You are beloved of the Lord. Right? Leof is Lilf in Old English. Worthy of the ruler. Wirthik, right? For you have understanding. This Ewit has interesting connotation, actually, as there's a note in here mentioning, I believe, let's see, that note. Yes, so Doan in 1991 characterizes Old English Yewit, which would be the cognate here to Gewit. Thus, as the purpose of Yewit was the understanding of obligation of a service, so this understanding of reciprocity. You actually have this in a Greek sense too, with the word like charis. It has a meaning of gift, right? It's related to charity, right? But it also has this idea of reciprocity, right? So it's not like I'm not going to save you for nothing, pretty much. Like you have to do something. Is generally the idea. Just like if you are the servant of a lord in a Germanic sense, you are not just literally doing nothing, right? You can't just be like, yeah, you're my lord, and I'm not going to do anything. It has a general sense of obligation. Okay, obligation of service. Right? It's a reciprocity, is what a cultural anthropologist would probably call it. So, but again, we have well, I don't really have much else to say on this page itself, but we have lots of interesting stuff. So it is interesting that that this is extra scriptural, though, right? So in Luke 1:28-33, we have that wording, but we also have the angel telling Mary that she is dear to the Lord, worthy to the ruler or the wielder, really, for she has intelligence or understanding or wits, right? I translate as understanding here. And again, it's detail provided beyond biblical sources. And since the Cathay actually in his note says it might be, in a sense, in order to allay any tendency to view Gabriel as a trick-playing elf, a white, or an other hidden being. And right, like the disciples' reaction to seeing Jesus walk on water, essentially, right? So it is very interesting. And then let's see. Let's go to the next page. Yes, here we go. Okay. It is en stiofol, thu scoutful allen wesan, viban giwihit, ne have thu werkan hugi, ne forti thu thinam ferhe, ne quam ikthi te enechun freson herod, ne drahu ik enig drugithing, thu scout usis doctines wesan, mudar mid manum endi scoutana mahu odeam. This hohon hevan kuningas suno, the Saxon Heliand, Tenabon, Echan mid Eldion. And one of the reasons I wanted to go over the Heliand in this case is because this gives us good contrast here, actually, because this is where Gabriel announces Jesus, right? And while we saw in Ælfric, he says his name will be Jesus, Jesus, right? And then Alfred says that is Highland, because Jesus literally means savior, just like Highland does, right? Healer, right? And savior in Latin would mean healer as well, right? And so here, though, he just we don't have Jesus all. He literally is called Heliand, right? Just it makes sense when why Highland is translated as Jesus so often, because that's just what it means. They're all names that mean Savior, Yeshua, right? Just Savior, Yeshua. So, so it's interesting that it's just here, and this is cognate. We mentioned this, I think, in my first lecture, that Heliand is just Savior, pretty much. So he will be called Healer. So let's see, lady full of favor or grace. I had a hard time deciding, so I just put both. You will in front of all. Women be blessed. Oops. So yeah, women there. But and then be not weak of heart, nor fear in your spirit. I come not hither to any temptation, nor do I bring any deceit. You will be our Lord's mother among men, and will bear a son, the high heaven king's son. He will be named Healer among people. And then I have one more thing I really wanted to look at. I don't think I have any notes. Oh, no, I do. I have Hugi here. Is related to an Old English word hia, actually. And it has a very similar meaning. But it kind of, in Old Saxon, it's very similar to the word mode, right? We have in Old English as well, mode. There's another one in Old Saxon, sail. And they mean like heart, mind, soul, essentially, right? And there's another example here actually as well. So his spachan hugi, bari an is breoston, which is to say that though he had a wise mind in his breast. Okay, so what does that even mean? Right, that we have the seat of emotion in medieval thought really is not like the modern concept. The seat of emotion and thought sits in the breast. Okay, right, and hugi is related to hugur in Old Norse, Hugin, right, like one of Odin's ravens, right? And so it is interesting in that sense. And then, so I think that gives us a pretty good idea. We do have heaven here, so as opposed to what we got earlier here, himmelisk, heavenly, right? Himmel, no cognate in English, but heaven does, obviously, heaven. And then, yeah. So I think there's a lot here you could look at as well if you wanted to. We have drichten here, drochtinas, with the genitive here, the lords. But I think lots of good stuff here. I don't want to keep you guys too long. So they have Modar, very similar. So, and then we also have, I skipped a few lines. I wanted to show you this one again as well. So, Anfiskar helag gest von heaven owanga, kuman thur kraft godas. The Holy Ghost will come from heaven meadows, come through the power of God. Okay, or the craft of God. And I think this one is just an interesting thing. You have a very interesting idea of a Germanic concept of like paradise, and we've mentioned this actually before. That Neorxnawanga. That's a Old English term for paradise. Ælfric does use. And it's really hard to gauge, besides the fact that we know Wong means field. It still does in modern English, Wong, W-O-N-G, or I would say Wong still. But, and it means field or whatnot. And it has this religious context. It's kind of like Li, La, in Old English, right? It's ash, Li, like an ash forest, but there's a Li in the middle. There's a pasture in the middle. And then it seems to be in a sense of the dark forest in Germanic thought. Even in fairy tales, you get much later, is a bad and evil, scary place. And so when you have these, Li literally is related to the word that means light. Okay, like it's lighted, it's not dark. All right, and so you have also this Wong thing. It's meadows. They are open. They are heavenly in a sense. Somehow they are heavenly. Remember, we've gone over this in Ners and Wong in Old English. The word for paradise in Gothic is Wong. Wongs, I think. Yeah, and so you have it here in Old Saxon as well. I'm not sure if it's in Old Norse or Old High German or any of the other, or Old Frisian for that matter. So, but anyways, this is pretty much the end now, I guess. So that is the end. That's the last slide. So thank you everyone for joining. This was decently longer than I meant it to be. This is the longest one there has been. But I hope it has helped with looking at the theology things. I hope this doesn't offend anyone. I hope this is just things to think about, but also things to learn. I think knowledge, especially when it's things that do challenge things that we do believe, really help. I think that it really helps in the face of adversity later on. I'd rather learn these things so it doesn't hurt me so much later on. And then, always the way of praying about it or something like that. But also, I just think in a philological sense, this is very interesting stuff. I think it has a lot of value here. Hopefully, the Old English that I supplemented it with and this Old Saxon has helped in some way, and then you can also get a greater sense of what else is out there and maybe what you would like also to read. And thank you for joining me on this. I very much appreciate it. And if you have any comments, again, you can just leave a comment on the video, or you can send me via email, contact me somehow. I am on Discord, for example, as well. It's very common for people my age, but there as Hemvar, Hemvar. You can contact me there. And anyways, I'm very glad to be here again. Liam QD Hall. If you have anything to say, if you want to use translation at all, I should probably go tidy up the slideshow so it's more useful. But anyways, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. I'll catch you next time for Easter.